Hi, guys. Today we will start with the story Why You Wouldn't Survive with Neanderthals. Awakening in a world where survival is a struggle. Dark clouds hung low in the sky, and the wind penetrating every crack felt ominous. The Neanderthal woke in his cave. The cold air made him shudder, but he knew there was no time to think about comfort. He quickly rose, surveying his shelter, roughly carved stones stacked tightly together. The cave was his home, but there was no room for relaxation here. In this world, survival was reserved for those who could act. He felt hunger gnawing at him, but he knew that now wasn't the time to search for food. He needed to start a fire, and for that, he had to find embers, strike sparks. That was the most important thing. In his life, fire wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a matter of survival. Fire, his hope. Without fire, even the smallest wound could lead to death. Without fire, the nights were deadly and the cold penetrated to the bone. Fire was his vital tool, the one he felt strongest with, capable of overcoming any obstacle. In a world where nature was hostile, fire was his only ally. In search of food and fire, the Neanderthal slipped out of the cave, feeling each breath of the cold air. His body had grown accustomed to this, but each step on the stones was a true battle. In his world, there were no roads, only rough trails that he followed, guided by the strength of his legs and eyes. He knew that his survival depended on his ability to find food and keep fire. Time was cruel. He had tried many times to survive in such conditions, but one mistake, and death was inevitable. He was alone, but his courage prevented him from giving up. He knew that if he didn't find food today, the next night could be his last. He walked the trail, following the scent of game, but nature was unyielding. There was silence everywhere, broken only by the sound of his own footsteps. He saw signs of prey, tracks in the snow, but couldn't catch up with it. With each step, his body grew more tired. He paused for a moment to catch his breath and looked around. It was empty. He remembered an old saying from his tribe: "If you don't want to be eaten, you'd better eat." Suddenly, he spotted a silhouette in the distance. He immediately realized it wasn't game, but another threat, a predator. His heart raced and blood pulsed in his temples. But he couldn't afford to panic. He had only one chance: hunting the predator. The Neanderthal crouched down, huddled into a ball, his body preparing for action. He knew that the predator would probably not notice him right away, but any movement could give him away. At times like these, instincts became more important than reason. He could use a stone or a club, but it was better to get closer, relying on his speed and reaction. The predator, a wolf or its close ancestor, moved slowly, sniffing the ground, listening to the surrounding sounds. It was looking for food, just like the Neanderthal. However, he knew that it wasn't just his life at stake. This was a fight for every morning, for every breath. If he didn't win, this wolf, or another predator, could kill him and eat him. Carefully using the grassy brush for cover, he began to approach. He knew he had to act quickly. His fingers tightened around the stone, and he was ready. But at the last moment, the predator lifted its head and froze, noticing the movement. The Neanderthal's nerves and heart were on edge. In an instant, his mind made a decision. He grabbed a stone and threw it, trying to distract the predator. The wolf, hearing the sound, abruptly turned and dashed away. At that moment, the Neanderthal made his final rush, striking it with a club. He felt his muscles tense to the limit. The wolf was strong, but with each blow, its resistance weakened. Finally, the predator fell. The Neanderthal, standing over it, breathed heavily, but with a sense of victory. He understood that this wasn't just a battle with a predator, but a fight against nature, against himself. He had survived. Starting the fire. After defeating the predator, the Neanderthal knew that there was another trial ahead, starting the fire. Even the prey, even the victory in the battle with the enemy, none of that would mean anything without fire. He ran to the nearest stone, holding a stick and some dry twigs. He knew that the power of fire wasn't just warmth. It was a whole system. Fire kept away the cold, helped cook food, and most importantly, scared away wild animals. He placed the stick on dry wood and began rubbing it quickly, creating friction. He felt his hands starting to ache, but he knew there was no other way. He continued diligently until finally he saw sparks. Fire. It lit up, and now he had a force that he could use. This fire wasn't just a source of warmth. It was a part of his life, a part of his existence. Without fire, there would be no victory, no food. There would be no life. Confronting the harsh nature. The Neanderthal sat by the fire, warming his hands and reflecting on how difficult it had been to achieve this victory. But despite the joy of success, he knew that each moment was followed by the next. Nature didn't wait, didn't show mercy, and his body couldn't relax. At that moment, his ears caught some sound. It wasn't the wind or the crackling branches of the fire. It was a step in the dark. He tensed up, stood, and strained to listen. Out of the darkness, a silhouette appeared. This time, it wasn't a human or a predator. It was something else. A creature unfamiliar to him, yet resembling a huge beast-like being with glowing eyes. The Neanderthal understood that this creature could be dangerous. He didn't know what kind of beast it was, but his instincts told him to be prepared for a defense. He grabbed a stone, ready to use it if needed. Battle for survival. The creature came closer, letting out a low, threatening sound. It was a creature of the night, likely a nocturnal predator. Maybe something like a giant panther, only more aggressive. The Neanderthal clenched the stone, and the moment the creature took another step forward, he quickly threw it straight into the predator's eyes. This moment was decisive. The creature recoiled from the hit, but it wasn't enough to make it retreat. It lunged at the Neanderthal again, but he was ready. He grabbed a club and struck it hard in the chest, finding himself in the middle of the struggle. The fight was brutal, but the Neanderthal knew he couldn't lose. This was a fight for his life, and he couldn't afford defeat. After several tense moments, with blows after blows, accompanied by flashes of rage and strength, the predator finally retreated. It understood that its strength couldn't overpower the one standing before it. The Neanderthal stood in the dark, momentarily exhausted but victorious. It was another day he survived, but he knew that more challenges awaited him ahead. A restless night. The Neanderthal sat by the fire, his eyes slightly squinting from the heat of the flames. The night was dark and cold, and although the fire provided warmth, it couldn't chase away the entire night. He felt his muscles aching from the long journey and battles, but his mind remained alert. In these lands, dangers lurked at every step, and rest was a luxury he couldn't afford. He glanced again towards the forest. Shadows played in the dark, and even the most mundane sounds, like the rustling of leaves or the crunch of branches under the feet of animals, could signal the approach of something dangerous. Still, the fire provided a sense of security, though its flames could not protect him from everything. As the night sky grew heavier, the Neanderthal felt an ominous presence drawing closer. He crouched down and grabbed his weapon, a heavy stone on a stick, an instrument that had often saved him in encounters with wild beasts. The sounds grew nearer, and figures emerged from the darkness. This time, they were not predators, but other Neanderthals, wandering in search of food. They moved cautiously, ensuring they wouldn't be noticed. The Neanderthal quickly realized that his group was not the only one struggling to survive in these harsh conditions. Soon, the other Neanderthals came closer, and he could make out their faces. They were from a different tribe, but their eyes reflected the same unease and vigilance. They were all ready for a fight, but there was no aggression in their gaze. He extended his hand to signal that there was no need for fear. They exchanged a brief glance, but remained cautious, watching each other closely. Times were hard, and survival in these lands was the responsibility of each individual. The Neanderthal knew that today they might unite against a common threat, but tomorrow, each would once again seek his own fate. Waiting for the morning light, dawn broke. The faint light gradually filtered through the branches of the trees, and the air began to fill with freshness. The Neanderthal rose, stretching his weary muscles. The night had passed, but it had left its mark. The fire had died down, leaving only a faint glow. He approached the fire and tossed in some more sticks, rekindling the flames. His attention was drawn to a group of animals running through the forest. The Neanderthal froze and watched. At that moment, his instincts kicked in. He knew that now was the time to be alert. These animals could become his food, but they could also be prey for larger predators. He grabbed a stone, preparing for the next move. The waiting was unbearable, but as always, life demanded action from him. He gritted his teeth and crouched, waiting for the perfect moment. A new day was beginning, and with it came a new battle. Survival wasn't just about overcoming predators. It was a test of strength, resolve, and the ability to act when each step could be decisive. In search of food. As the sun climbed higher, the Neanderthal began his day with a single goal: finding food. He knew that his chances of survival depended on how successful this day would be. Hunting was always a battle, and no 2 days were ever the same. He moved cautiously, navigating through the forest, carefully observing the signs of game. He often stopped, listening to the sounds of nature. At times, he could hear rustling, something leaping through the bushes. But everything was at risk, as large predators roamed these lands. Suddenly, a shadow flickered before him. He froze, his heart raced, and he took his position, ready for the moment when he could seize his prey. He was prepared for the unexpected. For a moment, everything stood still, and only his breath reminded him that he was alive. Then, among the forest trees, he spotted several wild animals grazing peacefully. This was his opportunity. He dashed toward them, hiding in the shadows of the trees, and with great skill, he tried to get as close as possible. Once the distance between him and his prey was minimal, he suddenly leaped, covering the last few meters. The stone in his hand flew toward the target, and the animal fell. Victory was his, but it was only a small part of the journey toward survival. The Neanderthal felt satisfied, but he understood that this was just the beginning of his path. He quickly felt hunger, and now it was time to prepare the food. He built a small fire to roast the meat. The task was not only to acquire food, but also to learn how to cook it, as this required certain knowledge and skills. The fire, his faithful ally, served not only for protection and warmth, but also to prepare the meat. He knew that only this way would the food be more nutritious and safe to eat. Without fire, even the simplest food would be dangerous. Taming fire had become not only a friend, but also a foe. The Neanderthal felt how his life was intricately tied to this element. He knew that without fire, he could not survive. But he also understood that fire was a tremendous force, and he needed to control it. He had seen how fire could destroy entire forests, and he realized that he could become its victim if he didn't learn how to contain it. One day, while exploring the forest in search of food, he came across the fresh traces of a fire. These were the marks left by some creature or perhaps another tribe that had once used fire. He stood still, examining the tracks and trying to understand how these fiery bursts could help him in his survival. The Neanderthal returned to his camp, deciding to experiment with what he already knew about fire. He understood that with each attempt, he would become more skilled, and fire would become his ally if he learned to manage it. This was the key to his survival, for he knew that if he lost control, the consequences could be fatal. The first trials of fire. The Neanderthal sat by the fire, watching the dancing flames. He was increasingly realizing how crucial this fire was to his life. Not only did it warm him in the cold of the night, but it also protected him from wild animals. Fire gave him confidence, knowing that no enemy would dare come too close. But with each passing day, he had to devote more and more time to keeping the fire alive. On this day, the fire began to fade. He watched with concern as the embers lost their brightness and the flames dwindled. This was the first time he needed to rekindle the fire. He looked around, but the forest was quiet, and there were no signs of lightning that could help. He thought it would be too risky to leave the fire behind, not knowing if he could return to it. He then decided to try using the stones he had seen many times in his life. He began rubbing one stone against another, hoping they would produce sparks. He tried again and again, but the stones didn't give any sparks. In despair, he stopped trying, but then he noticed a single spark falling onto the dry grass. From that moment on, he realized that fire could be started not just by lightning. He saw that fire could be kindled with strength and skill, opening new horizons for his survival. He was ready to fight this fiery element and conquer it. Overcoming fear. Fear was his faithful companion. At times he could control it, but with each passing day, overcoming more and more challenges, he realized that fear could be useful. It was the instinct that warned him of danger, the one that kept him alive. But it was also the same fear that could hold him back when action was required. He understood that he needed to learn to manage this fear. The Neanderthal found himself in the forest once again. He was alone, but unlike the previous days, he was no longer afraid. The fire had taught him to trust himself. Today, he needed to gather wood for the fire, and he knew that nothing, Not a single animal or sound in the forest should stop him. However, when he was almost at the spot, two large shadows appeared from the dark corners of the forest. They were predators. He froze, sharpening all his senses. Fear gripped him, but he did not give in. He stood still, intently watching every movement of the predators. They noticed him, but instead of attacking, they stopped and became alert. He knew that if he remained motionless, the predators would likely lose interest. This was a pivotal moment in his life. The moment when he realized that if he didn't panic but instead focused, he could find a way to survive even in the most terrifying situations. He stood still, and soon, the predators, not sensing a threat, retreated back into the shadows of the forest. This was his victory. He had learned to use fear as an ally, not an enemy. The first hunt. The night was coming to an end, and the Neanderthal stood in the forest once again, preparing for the next hunt. He felt the power of the earth filling him. He knew this hunt would be important. If he returned with a catch, it would boost his confidence. But if not, he would sit by the fire and suffer from the cold and hunger. Each day it became clearer to him that survival depended not only on strength, but also on skill. The Neanderthal quietly made his way through the forest. He knew he had to be fast and precise if he wanted to survive. In his hand was a stone tip, fastened to a wooden shaft, and he gripped it tightly. This was the weapon he had learned to wield, but there was still not enough confidence to be sure of a successful hunt. He knew that this time, everything depended on how well he could use it. Several hours passed. He spotted a herd of deer slowly moving through the forest. His heart raced, and fear once again enveloped him. But he remembered what he had learned about managing fear. He chose the largest target, a deer with long antlers. He was certain that this would be the moment that would change his life. He froze, waiting for the right moment, and then threw his weapon. The stone flew through the air and struck the deer. But it didn't bring the animal down on the first hit, and it ran. The Neanderthal began chasing his prey, his body tense, but he didn't give up. He pursued the animal, sharpening all his senses. His muscles strained, and despite his fatigue, he did not stop. After some time, the deer was caught. It was wounded, and this was his first successful hunt. The Neanderthal proudly raised his prey. This day became a symbol of his survival. He knew that with each such moment, he was getting closer to becoming a master hunter. Fire as a symbol of life. Fire had become his faithful companion. He had learned to keep it alive, even when the rain poured down and the wind tried to extinguish the flames. Fire became not only his protection, but also a symbol that he was part of this world, that he was alive. It was his connection to nature, his strength. Every day he checked to make sure the fire was still burning, knowing that without it, survival would be difficult. He had also learned not to fear the night, because fire could protect him from everything. Sometimes he would gaze at the flames and feel as though it spoke to him. Perhaps it was just his imagination, but he believed the fire had its own spirit. Fire was not just an element of nature to him, it was an ally. With each passing day, his life became easier, and he began to feel that something had changed in his soul. Now he had everything he needed to survive: fire, weapons, hunting skills. He was ready for anything that might come his way. The storm and the trials of nature. One day, a storm struck the tribe. The ancient world became a raging, brutal place. Clouds covered the sky, and rain began to pour, as if it had been falling since the dawn of time. The wind tore at the trees, and thunder shattered the silence. The Neanderthals struggled to hold their shelters, their spirits rising with the determination to survive. In these moments, they felt the power of nature, which could be both a protector and a destroyer. But there was another fear, the fear that the fire could go out. In such a storm, finding a new fire would be nearly impossible, and they knew that if they lost it, their survival would be at risk. But despite everything, the Neanderthal did not give up. He knew he had to preserve the fire and protect his family. He quickly prepared shelter and kept the fire alive, not allowing it to extinguish. The fire was vital to him, and his ability to sustain the flame under such harsh conditions became a testament to his strength. After several hours of battling the storm, the fire still burned. It was a great achievement, a symbol that he had triumphed over nature. However, he also realized that such trials were an inseparable part of their existence. He had learned to view nature as both an ally and an enemy at the same time. Fear and readiness for the next step. The Neanderthal sat by the fire, pondering what would come next. His life was full of fear, but it was this fear that made him strong. He knew that every day he faced something new and dangerous. It wasn't just a fight for survival, but a fight for his place in this world. He watched as his tribe grew, as new members were born. And all of this required strength and determination. But the hardest moments were the ones of solitude. Even among his tribe, even in the midst of many people, he sometimes felt alone. He was responsible for his family and the tribe, but what would happen if he couldn't fulfill his role? Still, he knew that he had to move forward. He couldn't afford to doubt himself. Every morning, he rose and looked at the rising sun, ready for the new trials ahead. Fear was his eternal companion, but it had also become part of his strength. He was not weak. He was ready for the next step. Lessons of the night. The night fell quickly, and as always, the tribe gathered its strength to endure it. At this moment, the Neanderthal realized that night was not just darkness, but a time when the world became even more dangerous and concealed. It was not only a battle with the cold, but with what could not be seen in the dark. At night, they could not rely on their eyes. Their hearing was their only guide. The tribe slept by the fire, and the Neanderthal remained on guard. He didn't know what might happen, but he knew that he had to be ready for any threat. In this dark silence, he had learned to listen to nature, to feel its breath, and to understand when it predicted an approaching danger. This was his second sight, which gave him confidence. The night was full of mysteries. The tribe, sitting by the fire, watched with respect as the fire they cherished reflected light on their faces, reminding them of the past. They often forgot how fire had been a great discovery and gift to them. It wasn't just a way to warm up. It was a symbol of their strength and survival. The long journey. Weeks passed, and the Neanderthal began to understand the importance of the long journey he had undertaken to ensure the survival of his tribe. He knew that his journey would not be quick, that every change in their lives would require immense effort. Yet, despite the exhaustion, he kept moving forward. The Neanderthals gradually mastered new methods of hunting and gathering, but sometimes hunting did not yield the expected results. When that happened, they would unite and search for new sources of food. During these times, trust and cooperation became especially important. The tribe understood that their strength lay in unity. Solitude meant death. The eternal trials. Each day was a trial. Every morning brought a new opportunity, but also a new threat. The fire, which was kept alive at the camp, was their light and warmth, but its flame could also vanish in minutes if they failed to maintain it. They could not afford to lose the fire. The tribe knew that their survival depended on many factors, and despite the fact that life was full of fear, they had become stronger than ever. In this harsh reality, they had learned to appreciate every moment, every success, every time the fire burned, every time their bodies were warmed, and every time they were alive. Art without words. While the flames danced in the center of the cave, the elder of the tribe, gray-haired and silent, took a charred stick and began to draw on the wall. The others watched in silence. No one knew why he was doing it, but everyone felt it was important. He drew the hunt, running animals, symbols, without words, without explanations. It was a story told with fire and stone. The tribe's young ones watched with open mouths. For the first time, they saw how memory could be preserved without sound. This moment became the birth of wordless art, a language that does not vanish with the storyteller's death. It was a path to eternity, left on stone. The Song of Charcoal. At night, when the fire was nearly out, one of the Neanderthals began tapping stones, not randomly, with rhythm. Another joined in. A third beat on an empty animal skull, producing a muffled sound. Thus was born the first rhythmic song. Not sounds of joy, but the pulse of life, struck on bone and stone. The tribe did not speak, but they listened. They felt each other in these rhythms. It was their music. Music that helped them not fear the dark. Music that carried the sound of running, the wind and the breath of the beast. It had no words, but it spoke everything that lived in their souls. When the sky collapsed. There came a day when the sky filled with clouds and icy drops began to fall. No one knew what it was. The tribe hid in the cave, trembling. Thunder split the sky and caused terror. They didn't know how to fight the storm. Their fire nearly died, and only one Neanderthal rushed out to save the glowing embers, covering them with moss. That was the day they understood. Nature was stronger, but their unity was their shield. This Neanderthal was not a leader, but he became a hero. His act was not discussed, yet that evening, the coals blazed again, and all knew the fire had survived because of one's courage. Smoke and dreams, the fire burned again. Branches crackled, and smoke slowly rose, slithering across the stone like a serpent. The Neanderthals sat in silence, staring into the flames. Children fell asleep at their mother's feet, and the elders closed their eyes as if listening to voices in the woods crackling. Smoke filled the cave with a soft veil, and it seemed dreams came with it. These weren't just images, they were feelings. Memories of mammoths, fear of the night, the echo of the day just past. The smoke carried them away, and sleep came easily. Thus, the fire became not just warmth and protection, but a guide into the world of dreams. The Stone of Memory. At dawn, one of the elders rose and walked to the wall. He pulled a flat piece of stone from a corner, its surface covered with old scratches. Every mark meant something. A date, a hunt, a death, a birth. It was their calendar, their chronicle, primitive though it was. He added a new sign, the track of a beast they failed to catch yesterday. And beside it, a small cross, a reminder that he would return. That stone passed from hand to hand. It wasn't valuable in the usual sense. It was memory. And on that day, the Neanderthals understood that time wasn't just day and night. It was the marks left on stone. Voice of the slope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Neanderthals heard a strange sound, as if the earth itself had spoken. It was a rock slide. Stones tumbled down the slope with thunderous force. They ran to the cave entrance, not to flee, but to listen. They stood still, holding their breath. It was the voice of the earth, the voice of their ancestors, they believed. They returned in silence. That night, no one drew, no one drummed, no one sang. They slept under the sound of distant echoes, as if the earth were telling its ancient tale. Sometimes nature spoke to them, not with words, but with power. Stone gods. In the darkest corner of the cave stood stones. They weren't placed randomly. They were brought from afar, lifted on shoulders, carefully chosen for their shapes. Some resembled heads, others bodies. The Neanderthals didn't know the word God, but deep inside, they felt these stones meant something. They couldn't be touched without reason. Before a hunt, they offered twigs, bones, even rare berries. They believed the stones could help, ward off death, bring luck. No one spoke of it aloud. But each night someone would approach and press a palm print onto one of the stones. And the stone held that mark like memory. The first remedy. When one of the women fell from a cliff, the tribe thought she wouldn't survive. Her breathing was shallow, her bones unmoving. But an old female with tangled long hair went into the forest and returned with roots, leaves, and bark. She placed it all in a heated stone bowl, added water, and let the steam cover the woman's wounds and mouth. That night her body trembled, but by morning her breath had steadied. No one understood what had happened, but the remedy worked. From that day, everyone began to notice herbs, scents, and the color of stalks. Nature spoke to them, not in words, but in form, and they began to listen. A night without fire. One day, the fire went out. They had brought wet branches too early and fanned the flames too late. The fire vanished. The tribe was left in cold and silence. Their eyes saw nothing, only blackness. The wind in the dark sounded like an enemy's voice, a leaf's rustle, like the steps of a beast. Even nearby breathing felt terrifying. They huddled together like children again, and for the first time in a long while felt fear, not of death, but of lightlessness. Without fire, the world felt foreign again. At dawn, when a young man brought embers from a neighboring cave, they greeted him like a hero. Light returned, and they all exhaled in relief. The tribe understood. Fire was more than heat. It was the border between them and the dark. A print in the snow. The children saw the snow first. They ran out for meat, and the world had already changed. Everything was white, and footsteps made no sound. Snow muffled all. It wasn't an enemy. It was quiet, cold, foreign. But more important was the print. An old man saw it in the snow, unlike any animal or human. Too large, with 3 toes. They followed it into the forest, but it vanished. And they all felt something strange, as if they were being watched. So they decided, sleep closer together, keep the fire stronger, and place the watching stones at the entrance. The Stone Song 1. Young Neanderthal struck 2 stones together and heard a sound he hadn't known before. He struck again, again, and again. He didn't know why, but the sound felt right. Others came, sat beside him. One picked up a bone, another a hide. They tapped, rustled, shook. Music formed. They didn't know that word, but rhythm moved them. That night they didn't sleep. They danced, drummed, even laughed. They couldn't speak with words, but their bodies spoke through sound. And that night, a song was born. The taste of roasting. At first, fire was only warmth and light. But one day a piece of meat accidentally fell into the embers. They almost threw it away, but the smell was new. Deep, warm, as if everything inside it had softened. One brave soul took it and tasted it. The meat was easier to chew, the flavor stronger. His body felt warmth inside. Since then, they began placing meat closer to the fire. Some even stuck it on sticks. A new feeling appeared. Anticipation. Food now required patience. But that patience gave more strength. Fire wasn't just for warmth anymore. It began to feed. Ice inside the cave. Winter came fast. Frost formed inside the cave, even near the fire. In the morning, breath turned to mist, and old bones ached. Food hardened, even water froze in bowls. Some coughed, some never woke. The tribe understood fire alone wasn't enough. They began building hide walls to hold the heat. They slept closer, without shame. Bodies warmed bodies. It wasn't weakness, it was survival. For the first time, they thought not only of the day, but of how to make it through the night. Ice taught them to plan. Flame in the eyes. Sometimes, when the night was especially long, the oldest male sat by the fire and stared into it, unmoving. Others thought he was sleeping with open eyes. But really, he was remembering. He saw lost faces, heard the crack of bones, recalled the scent of his first hunt. Fire became a mirror of the past. Anyone who stared into the flame long enough began to see something personal, not with their eyes, but inside. A silent understanding was born. Everyone had their own story, and fire helped preserve it. The forest went silent. One day, the forest went quiet. No birds, no animals. Even the wind stopped rustling. It was a silence that frightened them. The tribe kept still. They didn't hunt, didn't fetch water. Even the children stayed silent. That night, no one slept. It felt like the world was holding its breath. And only near dawn did a sound return, the cry of a night bird. Everyone exhaled at once. The forest spoke when it was alive. And when it was silent, it was time to listen. The bone dust. Sometimes the tribe found old bones in the earth. Some were too large, not from beasts they knew. One day they found a skull that looked like theirs, but smaller, with a different shape. They had no word for ancestors or history, but they felt this was from before them. The land held memory, and each discovery was a whisper from the past. They placed the bones near the fire and stared at them for a long time, as if trying to remember something they had never known. The cry of the mountains. When the tribe reached the foot of the tall, jagged mountains, they heard strange sounds, a hum, a moan, as if the earth itself was breathing. They didn't know it was the wind moving through the cracks. They believed the mountains were crying. No one dared go closer. Only the eldest male placed his hand on the stone and stood silently. Then he said, "They remember." And all understood. These rocks were as old as fire. They knew many things, but spoke only to those who could listen. The stone with a line a child found a stone. It had a scratch, straight, as if someone had drawn it on purpose with something sharp. He brought it to the cave. Everyone stared. No one understood. Then one of the hunters took another stone and scratched the first. Another line remained. It became a game. They began scratching marks, not words. But something inside told them. This mattered. It was memory that could be left behind. Smoke like the ancestor's shadow. When one of the young ones threw an old bone into the fire, thick white smoke rose. It swirled near the cave's ceiling and took on a shape, like a figure. Everyone held their breath. Someone closed their eyes. Someone whispered words they didn't even know. The fire ate the bone, but the smoke revealed something else. Since then, when someone was gone forever, their bones were burned. Smoke would rise, and the tribe believed it was a shadow returning to the stars. The path of tracks. After heavy rain, the ground turned soft. One of the hunters noticed animal tracks remained sharp. He followed them and found a den. It was a discovery. The earth could speak. Since then, the tribe began looking down. They studied tracks, understood who passed, where, and when. Even a person could be found by their footprints. For the first time, they saw that the world left signs. One just had to know how to read them. The warm stone. Near the river was one stone. The eldest hunter always sat on it. Even in winter, he said, "It's warm." Others tried, and truly, it held heat, even when everything else froze. They didn't know the words volcano or geothermal, but they felt something was beneath the earth. The stone became a place of strength. When a new child was born, they laid them on the stone. They believed the warmth gave the spirit endurance. The night without stars. One day the sky turned dark. No stars, no moon. A storm was coming, but the tribe didn't know. They believed the spirits had gone. No sound, no light. Only the cave's breath. They huddled in a circle around the fire. No one slept. Shadows trembled on the walls, as if trying to escape. It was the longest night, and when daylight came, they realized for the first time, light isn't forever. It must be guarded like life. The song of the water. At the edge of the forest ran a thin stream. The children played near it, and the elder listened. He said, "It sings." At first they laughed, but then they heard the sound of water held something like a voice. Each evening they gathered and listened. That's how the first rhythms began. Not words, not music, just noise, but with a heartbeat. They mimicked it, and the stream became a teacher. It taught them how to be quiet, yet alive. The taste of smoke. When they began smoking meat, they noticed the taste changed. It became stronger, as if the forest soaked into the food. They didn't know the word aroma, but they understood. Smoke transformed. Then they added leaves, bark, even moss. They watched how it smelled, how the taste shifted. It became part of a ritual. Fire not only warmed, it created. It made food special, and that meant meaningful. When the forest falls silent. Sometimes the forest fell silent. No birds, no rustling. Then no one went out. The tribe knew silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. They sat in the cave, listening. Every sound seemed loud, even a drop of water. And then the old hunter would say, "When the forest is silent, it's waiting, and we must listen and not disturb." The first circled one night. Someone laid the embers in a circle. No one knew why. But then the children sat inside. Then the mothers. Then the elders. They looked at one another. It felt strange. No movement, no goal. But from that day, the circle became a symbol. When there was a celebration of farewell or fear, they sat in a circle. It became a form of memory. The warm stone. When the fire died down, stones remained, and one old man hugging them said, "They remember warmth." At first they laughed at him, but one night a child fell asleep hugging such a stone and did not freeze. Since then, hearthstones became sacred. They were carried, placed near the head. And if a child cried, the mother put a warm stone beside him, a fire stone, a stone of memory. The beast of silence. A beast appeared in the thickets, one no one had seen. It didn't roar, it didn't tear. But tracks vanished, bones disappeared, birds went silent. They feared it, but never chased it. The elder said, "It's the beast you can't catch. It lives in fear, and fear lives in us." The tribe learned to live beside a shadow. And everyone knew, if you're silent too long, the beast comes closer. Ember in the palm. One day, a girl picked up a glowing ember. It burned her, but she didn't drop it. She walked and carried it. That's how they understood fire could be passed. The first portable flames appeared in shells, in clay bowls, in bark, and the tribe walked farther. Fire became a travel companion, like a sun held in hand, and the road grew longer. Whispers in the clay. One day, children played by the river, shaping clay figures. One cracked, and in the cracks there was sound, as if something inside was speaking. The elder listened and said, "Clay listens." From then on, they didn't just shape figures. They made traces, memories. When someone died, they shaped their face. When someone was born, they left a handprint. That's how they began to preserve not names, but the shadows of souls. Footprint in the ashes. When the fire burned out, ash remained. One day they found a footprint in it, a small foot, fading. But the tribe gathered around it. They didn't know whose it was, but they decided it was a sign. From then on, everyone left a mark in the ash before leaving in the morning. So the tribe would remember who had been there, who warmed themselves, who lived. Sky in the cave. In one cave, the ceiling collapsed, leaving a hole where the sky could be seen. By day, light. By night, stars. Children sat beneath it, listening to stories as if the sky whispered. The elder said, "Stars are campfires of other tribes, very far away." And each night someone kept watch over the sky like over a fire. So it wouldn't go out. So the tribe wouldn't be left in darkness alone with themselves. Totem of smoke. Once, smoke was seen as just the fire's shadow. But one day it showed the way. Smoke rose and led the hunters out of a ravine. Then smoke became a sign. They studied it. They drew it. Its direction became part of ritual. And when flame leapt toward the ceiling, everyone watched to see where smoke would point. It was a voice that didn't burn, but led. The singing stone. In a remote valley, they found a strange stone. When fire burned near it, it made a sound, deep and long. They called it the singer. They didn't touch it, they listened. Once a season, they returned to it, lit a flame, and listened. Some heard a mother's voice, some a beast's growl. But all heard the sky stirred when fire spoke to stone, warmth between fingers. One woman discovered, if you hold your palms over the fire, not too close, you can catch the warmth. She placed her hands on a child's face. He smiled in sleep. Thus came the touch of warmth. Not burning, not heat, but care. That's how they woke each other. That's how they said goodbye. The warmth between fingers became the first word without sound. The language of soot. One day, a boy smeared his face with ash. He laughed. Then, he drew lines on the wall. Someone understood. You could leave a mark not just with your body, but with meaning. The first symbols appeared. Black, crooked, unclear. But they were repeated, then awaited, then answered. Thus, ash became ink, and soot, a voice without a mouth. Stone oven. The elder placed hot stones in a pit, covered them with herbs, and then meat. He sealed it all with earth. After one sun passed, the food was soft, flavorful, different. The tribe ate in silence. It was new. Thus came the first way to cook underground. No smoke, no open fire. Stones became a new form of flame. Quiet, lasting, secret. Charcoal and footprints. After a hunt, a boy noticed black footprints. They were his own, but inside them, embers spilled from a pouch. He walked back over them and found the way to camp. Thus, charcoal became a marker. They drew arrows with it, marked paths. Fire helped not only to warm, but to remember. A footprint became a letter, beast from the flame. One day, someone saw a beast in the fire. The flame twisted like a serpent, rose like a bear, collapsed like a dying deer. The adults were silent, but the children played. Here, the spirit of a fox. There, a wolf. And in the fire, stories appeared. Not spoken, seen. The flame became a mirror for imagination. Where words had not yet been born, images already lived. Crackle like speech. At night by the fire, someone said, "It's speaking." The flame cracked, popped, whispered. The elder listened and nodded, said, "The fire replies." From then on, they stayed silent longer by the fire, listening, searching for meaning in noise. Fire became the teacher of silence. It taught not to speak, but to hear. Hide by the fire. In winter, a man sat by the fire wearing a hide. He noticed how the smoke soaked into the fur. The next day, animals sniffed him but didn't attack. They smelled the fire. Thus, the fire became not just a weapon, but a shield. The hide soaked in flame became a talisman, and the scent of ash, a guardian, unseen. First, ash and paint. When ash remained in the cave, children began to draw with it on the rocks. Gray smudges lay across the walls. Someone added charcoal, mixed it with fat. A black paste formed. They painted a hand. Then, an animal. Thus, ash became not waste, but paint. Fire became a brush. And the cave, a book, not written, but smeared. The shadow hunt one hunter noticed his shadow danced on the wall when the fire burned behind him. He began to move. Threw a spear. The shadow mimicked him. Another joined. Soon, a whole hunt in shadows. Thus came performance. No words, no sound, just shadows and flame. This was storytelling without a tale. Fire became theater. Fire as time. Each evening they lit the fire, and each time at the same moment. It became a marker of the day, like sunset, like sleep. When fire died, it was time to rest. Thus, the fire became a clock. Not exact, but alive. It didn't show time, it made it. The tribe's life flowed by ash and light. Spark in the eye. An old warrior stared into the embers. One suddenly flared. A corner broke off. In that light, he saw a snake nearby. He jumped away in time. Said, "The fire gave a sign." After that, they watched embers like eyes of spirits. There, one could see danger, or a path, or truth. Embers became oracles. Smoke in the sky. On a windy morning, smoke from the fire rose up. It swirled and climbed high. A young man said, "Our voice went to the sky." Thus began the belief that smoke carried thoughts, that the dead saw it, that if you tossed a berry or bone into the flame, a spirit received a gift. Fire became a letter to the lost. Smoke in the sky. On a windy morning, smoke from the fire rose up. It swirled and climbed high. A young man said, "Our voice went to the sky." Thus began the belief that smoke carried thoughts, that the dead saw it, that if you tossed a berry or bone into the flame, a spirit received a gift. Fire became a letter to the lost. Song by the fire. When the elder of the tribe died, they sat by the fire for a long time. Someone began tapping a stone gently. Another rhythmically blew into a hollow bone. A song was born. It had no words, only sounds, like fire breathing. It wasn't for the ears, it was for the chest. The fire listened and the flame danced in rhythm. To be warm is to survive. A child slept at his mother's back. She sat by the fire. It warmed them all. But once the wind carried it away and the tribe shivered. The elder said, "Fire is our skin. Without it, we are naked." They understood then. Without the fire, death came. Not from beasts, not from hunger, from cold. Warmth became more vital than food. Flame more crucial than stone. Fire hunt. At dusk, hunters surrounded a beast but hesitated. Then one raised a burning branch. Light flickered, and the animal flinched. They all lunged forward. From then on, they brought coals to the hunt. Not only as light balm, but as fear. Flames scared even what blades could not. A year without fire. One winter, fire died completely. Rain drowned everything. People huddled together but still shivered. Food was raw. Many grew sick. One man left to seek flame. He returned after 7 nights with a piece of glowing bark. All were silent. Then they wept. They understood. Not only fire was needed by the tribe, but the one who carried it. The rock that burns. Once in a cave, they found a black stone, and the elder tossed it into the fire. Suddenly, the flame rose brighter and higher. People backed away. Then they approached again. They called the stone Black Sun. They searched for it, broke it, kept it safe. It wasn't food, but it gave light, heat, and fear. Beasts feared it and humans respected it. Departure without fire. An old hunter knew he would die soon. He rose before dawn and left. without weapons, without fire, only a hide on his shoulders. No one searched for him. That was the way. Leave, not to consume warmth. Fire was for the living. But the smoke rising that day still reminded them. Someone had departed. Voice of the coal. One day in the coals, a shape appeared. Cracked bark, ash, and shadow formed a face. A girl saw it and said, "That's grandfather." The tribe looked and recognized him too. Fire became a mirror of memory. They saw the departed in it. Not with eyes, but with the soul. The fire became a place where the living met the dead. The first roasted meat. Before fire, food was raw, tough, sometimes dangerous. But one day, a piece fell into the coals. They pulled it out, and the smell was different. It called. They tasted it. It was a new flavor. Softness, fat, warmth. The elder said, "Fire has shown us another meat." And from then on, they roasted. Not always. But when they wanted celebration, they roasted. Warmth for the little ones. On a cold night, fire didn't just save, it sang. The crackle of flame lulled babies to sleep. Mothers placed hides closer to the fire, warmed their children's bones, and listened to the crackling like a lullaby. The flame became the first friend of an infant. Its light reflected in their eyes before they even understood what light was. Fire came first. When the beast came to the fire. One night, when the flame had nearly died, a wolf approached the fire. He didn't growl, he sat. The tribe didn't move. He stared into the embers, as if he remembered something too. The fire didn't crackle, it whispered. The wolf left before dawn, but afterward, his tracks followed close to the humans. He stayed. Not with them, but near. Fire accepted the beast. The lesson of the coal. A boy played with a charred stick. He burned another. Then he touched the fire and got burned. He screamed. The elder didn't scold. He said, "Now you know what respect is." From then on, the boy placed wood carefully. He looked into the flame as into the eyes of a beast. He didn't mock it. He didn't laugh. He simply respected. Dance around the heat. When the hunt escaped and the day was empty, the tribe still gathered by the fire. They didn't speak. They moved. Slowly, like shadows. They danced. The flame made their shapes long. Huge. Like ancestors. Like spirits. The dance wasn't about joy. It was about staying together. Even if only with fire. Even if only with shadow. Stone for spark. Far from the cave, a hunter found 2 stones. They rang. He struck one against the other, and sparks flew. He didn't understand at first. But one spark hit dry grass. Smoke appeared. He screamed. He called. He brought the tribe. And there, where there was only stone, fire was born. Not from wood, but from thought. Ash and trace. When the tribe leaves, they put out the fire, but on the ground remains a black circle, ash, a trace. And if someone walks by and sees it, they know the living were here. Fire was here. It was a language, without words, without sound, but clear as the sun. We were warm. We have left. Smoke up, thoughts down. In the morning, while all slept, the old woman sat by the embers. Smoke rose, a thin thread like a snake. She watched it as if something could be read in the sky. Where there was smoke, there was thought. She said nothing. But when the others woke, she already knew where to go. What to find. Who to hunt with. The fire told her. Or the smoke. Or maybe just silence. First burn, first mark. When the youngest son of the tribe burned his foot, the elder didn't panic. He took ochre from his pouch and drew a line over the burn, then another beside it. "Now you wear the fire's mark," he said. From then on, the boy changed. Not timid but careful. Not wild, but attentive. He learned not to play with heat, but to live beside it. obtain hunger and spark. Once, the tribe caught nothing. For 2 days, then 3. People grew silent. Even the children stopped playing. But one youth went into the forest, brought back a rotten branch, struck stones, a spark, dry moss, flame. He didn't bring food, but he brought strength. Fire in the belly won't fill it, but it gives strength to walk on, to search again. Dreams around the flame. When the night was especially black and the sky had no stars, the tribe lay close to the fire and slept. But each dreamed differently. One saw a mammoth, another a storm, another themselves as a child. But one thing was shared. In the dream, the fire was always there, even in other realities, even in visions. It stayed. When shadow ate the light, sometimes fire died. Even the spark vanished, and then the night became whole. True, shadows no longer danced. They devoured. The tribe huddled, waited for dawn, silent. These were the longest nights, without words, without sound, without hope. They knew. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was meaning. The stone that sang. When the tribe found a cave, its walls had lines, circles, snakes, all burned in. Fire had drawn them. Someone had lived here before, left memory, and ash. One elder touched the charcoal. He said, "This stone sang of us, before us." So they decided to stay. A language without words. Around the fire, they didn't always speak. Sometimes a glance said enough. Sometimes a gesture. Sometimes just the way you placed a branch in the fire, or to whom you handed a piece of meat. Neanderthals understood. Language wasn't only in the mouth, it was in the body. The silence, the fire. When embers became stars. In the darkest winter, they couldn't leave the cave. Snow had buried the entrance. Food was nearly gone. But the old woman said, "Look into the embers." There were patterns, like stars. Like a path? Like memory of something far away. They didn't sleep, they watched and waited for spring. The hum of bones. The boy brought bones, hollow, dry. He began to blow into them. One sound, one like wind. Another, like a beast's groan. They didn't know it was music, but they knew there was something ancient in those sounds. Like a voice before words, like a hum before speech. The flame that left. When the fire once died and no one could relight it, the tribe set out. They walked for 3 days, along the river, through the forest. They found another fire, at another tribe's camp. The Neanderthals looked at each other, slowly approached, not with weapons, but with branches. They brought them home, and the flame returned. The mark of ash. On the rock, there was a handprint, but it wasn't painted, it was ash, as if someone just placed their palm and left. No one knew who it was, but everyone who saw it fell silent, because in that print, there was something alive, like a breath turned into a sign. The stone. That whispered deep in the cave was a stone. It stayed warm, even when the air turned cold. If you pressed against it, it seemed to whisper. Not words, sounds, too ancient to understand. But the tribe listened and believed it was the voice from before the beginning. Fire in the beast's eyes. During a hunt, one hunter saw the flame's reflection in a wolf's eyes. After that, he said, "The fire isn't ours. It lives everywhere, even in beasts, even in water when it boils. We only carry it, like breath. The path through the dark." When the old man was dying, he asked for a smoldering branch beside him. "To find the way," he said. "Through black ground, through the dark, fire will show it." The tribe did as he asked, and by morning the smoke rose, into the sky. They descended into the valley, black and damp like the womb of the earth. No wind moved here, only a thick, heavy silence, as if the earth itself held its breath. Every footstep was muffled by moss and wet soil. Only occasionally would a rock tumble from a cliff, echoing dully in the darkness. The tribe did not stop. There was no food, no fire nearby. Only the path through the dark, where fear hid in the cracks of the rock. The elder female walked at the front. Her hair was soaked by mist, her face smudged with ash from long-dead fires. She carried a bundle of dry roots and left faint marks on the stones behind her. These were not words or letters, but memories, so that others, if they came this way, would know. The path is possible, but it will not be easy. Behind her walked the old man. His legs trembled and his breath grew more shallow. He knew he might not leave this valley, but his eyes were calm. He had already lived what he was meant to live. The young followed silently, stubbornly. Their bodies were strong, but their minds full of doubt. They didn't understand why they had to go deeper. Why follow those who might not survive? But something inside them, ancient, deeper than thought, whispered, "You must go, even if you don't know why." In one of the crevices, they found a nest of warmth, branches holding a hidden ember. The fire wasn't alive, but a golden glow still lingered inside. They stopped. The elder female breathed life into it, added bark and splinters. A spark was born again. The darkness retreated slightly, but it did not surrender. All around, this was its land, and it did not forgive those who walked too deep. The old man stayed by the fire. He did not go further. He simply nodded and sat down. This was his place. The others moved on, carrying the light deeper into the dark. Through the icy breath of the wind howled like a beast robbed of rest. It tore through gorges, rolled over snowy hills, crashed into trees and broke them like dry twigs. Dense snow blurred the horizon, and the sky turned gray, lifeless, like ashes. This was a winter that even the oldest Neanderthals could not remember, the kind that erases tracks, extinguishes fire, and leaves behind only silence. Among the stone outcrops, deep in the cliff, the tribe hid. There were fewer of them than last season. Some had not returned from the hunt. Others had not survived the past frosts. Those who remained were silent, as if the earth itself had taken their voices. The fire inside the cave barely flickered. The skins stretched across the entrance trembled from the wind. Children slept, pressed close to their mothers. The elders lay deeper inside, nearer to the warmth. The men, those who could still stand, consulted without words. Their eyes spoke more than any sound. Hunger was coming. The last game had gone south. The tracks led to a place where Neanderthals had never been, across frozen plains where the wind cut like flint. The shaman, old and hunched, sat before the coals. His fingers were numb, but he still traced lines in the ash. In those lines, he sought a path, not for himself, for the tribe, for the children who could still be saved. The next day, 3 warriors set out. Their path led where no tracks lay. The branches of trees snapped beneath their hands. Stones slipped underfoot. Every step was a struggle. But behind them was life, and ahead, a chance. And if the gods of frost allowed, they would bring it back. Hunting in the cold. It began with 3 figures vanishing into the wind. The warriors walked without looking back. Their hands were wrapped in hides, their faces covered in fur, but the cold still seeped through everything. It reached their bones, broke their breath, slowed their hearts. The forest made no sound except for footsteps, the creak of snow, and their own breathing. The path was dangerous. The ground beneath the snow was treacherously slippery. Branches that seemed sturdy broke under weight. Once one of the warriors slipped. Ice cracked beneath him, and only the quick hand of a comrade kept him from vanishing into the frozen water. Silently, he stood up and walked on, saying nothing. On the second day, the air cleared and birds appeared in the sky. That was a sign. The animals hadn't gone too far yet, but finding tracks meant reading a language written on ice. And one of them, the youngest, named noticed hoof prints, barely visible but fresh. They followed the trail. Day faded into gray night, and the moon glinted off the snowdrifts. They did not light a fire. The smell of smoke would scare the prey. They slept with one eye open, taking turns, covered in fir branches pressed against their bodies, like the last remnants of warmth. On the third day, they saw it. A lone deer, young but strong, grazing at the edge of the plain. It was gold in this white hell. Their hearts beat faster. A kill meant life. One moved forward, quiet as a shadow. The others flanked from the side, and when the spear, carved from sturdy oak, pierced the animal's neck, the world froze for a moment. The deer bolted, blood splashing across the snow. It ran 20 more steps and fell. No cry, no struggle, only the soft thud of flesh hitting the earth. The three stood over it, not celebrating, not rejoicing, just breathing. Death here was only necessity. And now they had to carry the meat back. Through the wind, through the night, through everything that wanted to take it from them. The way back. The night breathed frost. Winds tore across the plain like a pack of predators. The three Neanderthals moved slowly, heavily, carrying the butchered body of the deer across their shoulders. Their backs bent under the weight, their legs sank into the snow, and their breath came in clouds of steam. Every movement was effort, but they did not stop. Their minds were focused, not on pain, not on exhaustion, but on returning. The meat had to reach the camp. There, among the pines, they were awaited. Children, elders, those who remained by the fire. Without this meat, some might not see the next moon. Cold was the enemy. It slowly eroded strength, drained heat from their bodies, like an invisible predator. But they had a kind of strength you wouldn't understand. Not the strength of muscle, but the strength of will. They moved forward, even as their fingers went numb, even as their eyes watered from the freezing wind. The snowfall began suddenly. The world turned white, as if the skies wanted to erase all life. In such conditions, a modern person would lose direction and freeze within the hour. But the Neanderthals navigated by trees, the shape of rocks, the scent of the air. They felt the land as part of themselves. In the third hour of walking, one of them fell. He simply collapsed to his knees. His breath was ragged, hands trembling. He didn't ask for help, just tore a strip of hide and wrapped it tighter around his legs to force blood back. His companions said nothing, only slowed their pace to let him recover. They were not a group. They were a body, a single organism. They walked 2 more hours. The moon broke through the clouds. They saw the shapes of familiar trees when they heard the howl. Wolves, flesh and blood called predators. They knew the scent of fresh meat trailed behind them. One of them pulled a bone with some fat on it and tossed it aside. A decoy. If the wolves were near, they might be distracted. But were there 2, 3, or an entire pack? They quickened their pace, almost running. The weight no longer mattered. Exhaustion vanished in fear. When the light of the fire flickered ahead, each heart beat like it was the first time. At the camp, they were met in silence. Women rushed for knives, children cried out, elders nodded. It was a gift. It was life. The silence of a winter night. In the quiet of night, the camp breathed fire. Flames flickered, casting reflections on hides stretched between trees. The fires smoked the snow, and the smoke rose high, fading into the gray sky. The hunter's return didn't bring noise. There were no cheers here. Joy was in movements, in glances, in how quickly and precisely the meat was cut, distributed, and immediately placed to boil. The Neanderthals had no words for feelings like modern people do. Their language was short, fragmented, but their gestures were clear, and their gazes were saturated with meaning. A single look could tell of pain, gratitude, and the willingness to die for another. By the fire, the elder pulled a stone from the coals. It was warm, almost hot. He handed it to a young woman with a baby so she could warm the child. It wasn't just an act of care, it was a lesson. Passed silently, but remembered forever. Somewhere on the edge of the camp, a child was drawing in the snow with a stick. Lines, circles, handprints. He didn't know what he was drawing, but his body remembered. He mimicked movements he had seen from adults, from his father, who now slept wrapped in hide, from his brother who had left and never returned. There was meaning in these motions. The night was dark. The stars shone, but fainter than usual. Clouds were moving in from the south. The air smelled of change. Animals were hiding. Even the owl that usually circled above the fire had vanished into the forest. The elder felt it. He said nothing, just stared at the sky for a long time, then placed new branches into the fire. They cracked, released the scent of fresh pine. Someone shifted closer. Silence thickened, like a warm hide over the shoulders. It is on such nights that decisions are born. Without words, without voices, only through glances, motion, presence. The camp waited. Tomorrow someone would walk into the forest again. Someone might not return. It was part of the path, part of a life you would not survive. The last hunt, before the great winter. The Neanderthal tribe, exhausted by long migrations and grim days, arrived at a familiar valley. They had been here before, a stream with cold water, steep cliffs, and narrow trails between trees. The wind was heavy, smelling of snow. The tribe's elder male, covered in scars, stopped on a ledge and gazed into the horizon. He knew this hunt would be the last before the great winter. Animals were retreating, sensing the storm. Tracks were rare, fresh blood on the bushes disappeared faster than before. The Neanderthals moved silently, following the ancient rules of the hunt. Every step was deliberate, every glance alert. Their weapons were simple: stone tips, fire-hardened spears, sturdy clubs. But behind them stood centuries of instinct. A female with long dark hair, crouched by the tracks. Deer, fresh. They smelled of life and fear. The leader bent down, sniffed the ground. They set off in silence. Only breath and the crunch of snow underfoot. The chase lasted all day. The deer was wounded but strong. Dusk swallowed the forest, but the Neanderthals did not stop. They needed meat, not for satiety, for survival. By nightfall, they caught the prey. In a final leap, one of the young males hurled a spear, and the deer collapsed. They did not cheer. They simply knelt and gave thanks to the animal. The carcass was quickly butchered. Some meat was wrapped in hides, some grilled on hot stones. The fire crackled, reflected in the tribe's eyes. This was no feast. This was a ritual. They knew. Snow was coming. The great winter would begin soon. White silence. Snow did not come suddenly. It crept in slowly like a predator. At first, a gentle dusting, almost tender then. Thick, heavy flakes that shrouded the sky. The tribe was prepared, yet it still felt as if the very earth had frozen in fear. Every sound, a step, a breath, a branch snapping, was drowned in the white silence. The Neanderthals took shelter in a deep cave on a hillside. Its entrance was narrow, almost invisible. Inside, warm darkness, the scent of smoke and hides. They sat close to one another, sharing breath, body, and story. On such days, even silence became a language. Outside, the wind howled. It pounded the rocks, flung snow, wailed like a starving beast. Sometimes someone would go out to fetch wood, check traps, clear their mind. But each time they returned quickly. The winter thickened. Food was stored deep inside the cave. Meat, fat, roots. Everything was divided and rationed. The weakest were fed first, then the children. The strongest ate last. It was not a law of cruelty, but one of survival. Fire became the center of their world. It gave more than warmth. It was memory. Its flame flickered in their eyes like a living being. Around it, the elders whispered tales of beasts, of spirits, of the sun that would return. Sometimes the flame trembled, and in that moment, it felt to everyone. The fire was afraid too, afraid of the winter, the hungry stones. Weeks passed, the snow did not melt. It only grew, layer upon layer, turning the world into a silent white sarcophagus. Even the trees looked dead, their branches iced over like bone. No birds, no animals, only the relentless howl of the wind and rare, nearly hopeless tracks of a fox or a wolf. The tribe's hunters returned more and more often with empty hands. Traps stood like stone reproaches. Hunger crept into each of them, not openly, but quietly, with emptiness in the belly, numbness in the fingers, a shadow in the eyes. The tribe's elder, a bent man with gray eyes, stared into the fire and said, "Hunger is a spirit. It does not merely take the flesh. It erases the mind. It makes you forget your name. It makes you see your brother as food." They feared this spirit more than wolves. Wolves could be killed. Hunger only endured. One day, a young man went far beyond the hills. He vanished. 2 days passed. When he returned, he said nothing. He only laid down a slain deer inside the cave. His eyes were dead like stones. The tribe ate in silence. No one asked where he had found the prey. Bones in the ash. The fire in the cave was dying, leaving behind barely glowing embers. Above them, smoke lingered like a heavy memory of something lost. The tribe slept, pressed against each other, but their sleep was restless. Deep in their minds sat fear, silent and relentless, like a beast hiding in the dark. They noticed that the elder, always quiet, had begun talking to himself. His lips whispered words, as if in a stranger's voice. He ran his fingers along the cave walls as though searching for something beneath the stone. Sometimes he wept at night, so softly it sounded like dripping water. One morning he was gone. Only his staff remained, and a drawing scratched into the rock. A circle with fire burning inside it, and around it figures like humans stretched their arms toward the light. No one understood its meaning. Some of the young hunters began to argue. Hunger made them sharp, cruel. One struck another over the last piece of dried meat. Blood was spilled, and the cave grew even quieter. Even the children stopped playing. Even laughter disappeared. And more often at night, they found bones in the ashes. Thin ones, too thin. The elder's shadow. The cave, once filled with the breath of life, now felt like a narrow tomb. The walls were damp, the cold seeped in despite the fire. But the fire was different now, not warming, but watchful. The tribe spoke less and less, as if words no longer mattered. No one searched for the elder. Even his most loyal pupils didn't speak his name. There was something terrifying about his disappearance, as if he had taken a part of the tribe's spirit with him. One night, a young hunter, already scarred by battle, dreamt of the elder. He stood by the fire, but his face was hidden. Silently, he stretched his hand toward the flames, and they rose, as if responding to him. Upon waking, the hunter told no one. But something in his gaze had changed. He began to sit by the fire more often, staring into the embers, as if trying to find answers in them. He stopped laughing. His movements grew slower, as though every effort required his full will. That same night, another hunter went into the forest and never returned. Then another. Then a third. The tribe contracted like a heart gripped by fear. It shrank, losing not only people but meaning. Those who remained began to wear charcoal on their chests, a symbol of fire, of fear, of loss. And in the darkness above them hung the same question. What had awakened with the fire? The silence of bones. Many nights had passed since the last hunter left and never returned. The tribe stood still in a strange state between life and something else, something that had no name. Children no longer played. Women stopped telling dreams. Even the youngest no longer cried at night. The The cave breathed heavily, as if the earth itself was suffering alongside those who remained. In the depths of the cave, where the cold was constant and the air smelled of ash, one of the old hunters found a bone. It was black, as if charred, but untouched by fire. And it bore marks. Not carvings, not scratches. Marks that seemed to have grown on the surface. No one knew who had left them. Perhaps the fire itself. The old hunter showed the bone to only one person, a woman born on the night lightning struck 3 times. She stared at it for a long time, saying nothing. Then, she closed her eyes and, without knowing why, placed the bone in a pit of coals. Neither flame nor smoke touched it. It remained just as black and silent. From that day forward, the bones began to speak. Not with sound, dreams changed. Those who slept close to the coals awoke with altered gazes. Some began to draw on the walls, though they had never done so before. Others wandered into the forest and returned with eyes full of terror. And everyone knew. The bones lied, but in their lie was a truth. A truth about what once was, or what will be. Footprints in the ash morning came without the sun. The sky was blanketed with heavy clouds, and even the birds dared not sing. The tribe slowly emerged from the cave. Their steps left no trace on stone, but in the ash near the old fire pit, there were new footprints. No Neanderthal had feet like these. Too long, too narrow, too straight. The elders stayed silent, but the young ones, who had not yet fully learned fear, followed the trail. It led upward, to the slope, where only lichens had grown and snakes had lived before. There, they saw a hearth, but not theirs. The fire was alive. It danced steadily, as if aware of being watched. Above it hung a stone with a carved hole from which water dripped. Drip, drip, directly into the flame. And it did not go out. The young ones returned, trembling. No one dared to touch the fire. No one tried to take it. But the night brought change. Now each member of the tribe felt something. Someone's presence. Some began speaking in their sleep in a language no one had taught them. Others stopped sleeping entirely. One old hunter carved what he saw onto the wall, a tall figure without a face, standing over the fire with eyes like embers. From then on, ash was no longer just ash. It remembered footsteps, the whisper of embers. Night fell quickly, and the wind once again carried the scent of a distant fire. But now it was different, not warming, not homely, but foreign, unsettling. The tribe's elder sat by the cave's entrance, staring into the darkness. He had not closed his eyes in 2 days. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Deep within the cave, the embers were dying. But when the hunter's gaze touched them, they seemed to stir. Almost imperceptibly, but they moved. He heard a whisper. Not words, breath. The old breath of the earth. A sound like someone trying to remember a name long forgotten. The young ones slept fitfully. One cried out, another moaned. In their dreams, returned the one no one had called. A tall figure standing in the fire, not burning. With each visit, his shape grew clearer. At dawn, the elder summoned 3 hunters and ordered them to bury the hearth. Not extinguish, bury, with earth. So the ash would speak no more. But it was too late. One of the young had already begun drawing symbols on the walls. Symbols he had never seen. His fingers moved on their own, and when asked what they were, he only said, "It's the call." No one asked him again. The path into ash. The day began in silence. Even the birds, which usually cried at dawn, were quiet, as if something hung in the air, heavy, invisible, ancient. The tribe awoke slowly, warily, like animals after a storm. No one hurried to the hearth. It was no longer there. The earth piled over the embers had not cooled. It steamed, releasing a thin vapor, as if muttering tales only it could understand. The elder was silent. His hands were black with ash, and every finger trembled. He knew something had begun, something that could not be stopped. The youth who had drawn the symbols had not spoken all morning. He had gone deep into the cave where light could not reach. When they found him, he sat before a stone wall, covered in circles, spirals, lines, and among them a sign. New. Fire. Standing on two legs. It told me its name, the youth whispered. It burns inside. They didn't believe him. But just in case, they forbade anyone from approaching the embers. No one drew again. No one spoke of dreams, but almost everyone had them. That night, the fire spoke again. Not in words, in sighs, in flickers, in faces within the flame. Each who looked saw something different, and no one wanted to share. Sand among bones. The morning came windy. Gusts roared across the plain, lifting dust and sand, as if time itself tried to erase the tribe's presence from the earth. The Neanderthals, wrapped in hides, sat in a circle, not to speak. Their eyes were fixed on the ground, where a piece of charred bone lay. It didn't belong to a beast. Everyone knew that. The elder was silent, but in his eyes was fear, the kind the young had never seen before. This wasn't fear of a predator or the night. This was fear of the unknown. The youth who had heard the fire's name no longer slept. His eyes were red, lips dry, movements sharp and unpredictable. He drew again. But now, not on walls. He scratched symbols into the earth, onto bones, onto his own skin. Those who tried to stop him stepped back, hearing him whisper something incoherent, but repeated. A name. The tribe began to divide. Some believed the fire brought knowledge. Others, that it was a curse. The arguments weren't loud. They rustled like grass. But they were there, and the tribe could feel the ground trembling beneath them. Not from a beast, from themselves. Dance of the flame. The night arrived not as usual. The wind died down and the sky darkened so quickly it seemed as if the darkness itself descended from the mountains, overshadowing the world. The one sitting by the last embers knew the fire would speak again. He couldn't understand what it meant, but he felt it in every part of his body. Something tightened in his chest, and darkness filled his mind. The youth was once again at the fire, but now his face was distorted. He stared at the flame as though it were an old enemy, and it responded in kind. It asked questions he could not answer. But the answers were there, in the dance of the flame. He saw movements that did not belong to humans. It wasn't just fire. It was fire that lived its own life. The last time the tribe had lit a fire to cook food, no one noticed how some embers began to dance, as if something lived beneath them. The bones of animals started to crackle, but it wasn't the sound of their burning. It was the sound of something else, ancient, foreign. Some tribes spoke of fire as a gift, but now more and more believed that fire was the beginning of the end. It knew something that should have been forgotten. Shadows in the fire. The night grew deeper and the flame illuminated less and less. Its shadows began to stretch and writhe, hiding what was hidden. The elder approached the fire, and as always, his eyes filled with unease. He couldn't understand what was happening. He was one of those who once knew how to control fire, but now everything was different. He felt something new awakening in the fire, something that didn't belong to this world. The elder lowered his hands into the ashes, trying to find the part of the fire he once knew. But the ashes were cold, and the embers didn't burn like they used to. This wasn't just a change. This was something older than fire itself. It was darkness hidden in the fire. The youth, still sitting by the fire, began to mutter again. His words were indecipherable, but they were heard by all. They were words that might have been a prophecy, words that could mean the beginning of something great and terrifying. He didn't know them, but he kept repeating them. The fire began to tremble. It seemed that its flame grew stronger, then weaker. It was a cycle, and it repeated again and again, like the breath of some great creature standing behind the fire flame and stones. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness covered the land, the tribe gathered by the fire. But now, every gaze was wary. The faces of the people were dark, like the night itself, and the fire before them had become something alien, unknown. It wasn't the comforting fire that warmed them on cold winter nights. It was something dangerous, something incomprehensible. The youth, despite his fear, approached the fire once more. He was ready. He understood that fire was not just warmth. It was a living thing, part of a world they couldn't understand. He touched the embers, and the moment his fingers brushed the fire was the moment everything changed. The stones around the fire began to glow. It was strange, but everyone saw it. They didn't know how to explain this light, but it was there. This light seemed ancient, as though it came from the depths of time. The stones began to shine with a blue light, and in that moment, the youth understood that fire and stones were connected. They lived together, and what he saw was the result of their unity. The legend of ancient fires. That evening, the tribe heard a story told by the elder. He spoke of a time when fire first appeared on Earth, when primitive people couldn't yet control it, but revered it as a gift. Fire was to them a god, giving life and warmth. Yet at the same time, it was a terrifying, unexplored wonder, capable of consuming everything in its path. The elder told that originally, fire was only a part of the natural elements, fire from lightning or flame that erupted from the bowels of the earth. But as people began to develop their knowledge, they sought ways to control fire. The elder believed that it was at that moment that fire became more than just an element. It became a teacher, teaching people how to survive, showing them what it meant to be alive in this world. The youth, sitting by the fire, listened with bated breath. He saw how the elder spoke of fire being with them, long before they could imagine. It was both their ally and their enemy. It gave life, but it could take it away in an instant. Destruction by fire had become more powerful than ever before. It no longer merely warmed and lit the dark nights. Now, it was a weapon. In the hands of the tribe, fire was mighty, but also terrifying. From time to time, the tribe used it to destroy animals, but these animals were growing stronger. Fire had become a danger if not handled carefully. The youth saw how fire could be used for protection, but more and more, he noticed how fire consumed everything in its path. The tribe had learned to take pride in this power, but over time, it started to feel like an evil they could not control. One evening, as the youth lit the fire, he noticed how its flames became too bright and strong. The fire threatened to spiral out of control, and the tribe, though prepared, felt real fear. This fire was more than just an element. It was the embodiment of nature itself, with its forces and chaos. The curse of fire. The youth stood before the fire, staring into its dancing flames. It was alive, it beckoned, but now it had become something ominous, something that could no longer remain in their control. He knew that the time had come when fire ceased to be an ally. It had turned into an enemy, something that was dangerous to everything they knew and loved. He remembered the words of the elder, who had once said that fire could be both a blessing and a curse. It could give life, and it could destroy it. That moment had come. They stood on the edge, and the future of the tribe depended on whether they could find harmony with this mighty element once more. At that moment, the flame flared brighter, and smoke began to pour from it, filling the air. He felt his eyes begin to water, his breath becoming labored. The youth understood that they had become victims of their own creation, the consequences of destruction. In the following days, the tribe was filled with unease. The fire, which had once been a gift, had now become a symbol of their own doom. Some of the elders began to doubt whether they should continue using fire. They feared it might lead to even greater misfortune. The youth, who had been the first to notice the changes in the fire, had now become the person everyone turned to for advice. He understood that fire was part of nature, but it had to be handled with care. He suggested a new path for the tribe, not to try to destroy fire, but to learn how to coexist with it. The tribe made a decision. They began to respect fire, but they no longer used it recklessly. Instead of lighting flames for hunting or defense, they used it only for warmth and food. Fire became a part of their lives, but no longer a part of their battles. In search of balance. Over time, despite the dangers, fire became an inseparable part of their lives. The youth, now an adult, understood that the tribe's world had changed. They could no longer live without fire, but now it was not just a tool for them. It had become a part of their world. Every evening, as the tribe gathered around the fire, they looked at it with respect and caution. They knew that fire could provide warmth and light, but it could also bring their destruction. Now, having learned to live with fire, they could focus on other aspects of their lives, such as hunting, gathering, and surviving in harsh conditions. The youth, who had become a true leader among them, knew that their future depended on their ability to live in harmony with nature. Fire was just a part of their lives, and they must not allow it to become their master. The wisdom of the ancestors. Many years had passed, and the tribe had learned to respect fire more and more. With each generation, they grew wiser, passing their knowledge down to their descendants. But the most important thing they understood was that fire was not just a force of nature, it was a symbol of their connection to the world around them. The youth, now grown, often gathered with the children around the fire. He told them stories about how they should cherish fire and always remember its power. He taught them how to light a fire, how to maintain it, but most importantly, how not to let it become dangerous. The ancestors had left them much knowledge, and they began to understand more and more how to live properly in this world. However, despite all their wisdom, they still occasionally faced dangers, and fire became something they had to control rather than be its slaves. Nature and fire. When the tribe learned how to keep fire in their homes, they began using it to create safe places. Fire became their protector, their ally in the dark of night. But despite this, the tribe always remained aware that fire was dangerous, and they could never be certain it wouldn't escape their control. One day, when the forest around them was engulfed in flames, they realized that despite their knowledge, fire could still get out of control. The tribe gathered all their strength to protect their homes, and despite their hard efforts, they managed to stop the fire. This event remained in their memory forever, as a reminder that even the most controlled fire could become a threat. The flame of the future. With each passing year, fire became an inseparable part of the tribe's life. It was no longer just a means of survival, but a symbol of strength and the ability to adapt to the surrounding world. Now, they not only knew how to create fire, but also understood how to live in harmony with it. The youth, now the leader, decided to pass on this lesson to his children, the lesson of harmony with fire. He knew that the future of their tribe depended on how they treated this mighty element. He told them that their connection to fire was not just material, but spiritual. Fire, like their lives, must be used with respect and caution, so that it would not become a threat. Thus, in their tribe, fire became not only a tool, but a lesson passed down from generation to generation. Fire and life. With each passing day, the tribe's life became more and more dependent on fire. Fire became their friend and protector. On cold nights, they sat around the fire, sheltering from the cold and danger. Fire brought warmth and light, provided them with food and safety. It was the center of their existence. But despite its importance, fire remained dangerous. No one could guarantee that it wouldn't get out of control. Therefore, every member of the tribe had to exercise caution when working with fire. Fire was not only a source of life, but also a force that needed to be respected. When fire does not save, one day, despite all the precautions, a tragedy occurred. In one of the settlements of the tribe, where the oldest elders and young children lived, fire suddenly got out of control. Several houses burned to the ground, and part of the tribe had to seek refuge in the forest. After this incident, the tribe again spoke about how fire could not always be their friend. It was dangerous and unpredictable. But despite the loss, the tribe did not lose hope. They gathered again around the fire, discussing how to protect themselves in the future. The fire threat. The tribe studied all the consequences of this disaster. They realized that their connection to fire was not only a blessing, but also a threat. The fire threat had now become an inseparable part of their lives. However, they also began to realize that it was only through fire that they could survive in this harsh world. For them, fire became not just a means of survival, but a part of their identity. Fire was what distinguished them from other creatures. It gave them confidence that they could withstand hardships, but it also reminded them of how fragile their lives were. The flame of the future. Over time, the tribe learned to better understand the power of fire. They began to use it with even more caution, but they did not lose confidence in its importance. They continued to light fires and keep them going, realizing that fire was now not just an element, but a part of their survival. The youth, now an elder, often gathered around the fire, passing on his knowledge to the young. He told them how important fire was, but also how dangerous it could be. He taught the children that fire was not just a means of warmth, but a symbol of their existence. The ancient lesson. When new members joined the tribe, they were taught how to handle fire. The ancient teacher always said that fire was not only a friend, but also an enemy if one did not exercise caution. Everyone had to learn how to maintain the flame and light a fire, but also understand its power and limitations. He often spoke about how fire saved lives, but also how it could take everything away if one was not careful. He spoke of how many of his predecessors, in their desire to be strong, perished because they did not respect fire and failed to tame its power. In his eyes, it was clear that fire was like a giant beast, strong but merciless, consumed by darkness. The fiery flashes were not only a result of their efforts to kindle the flame, but also an important aspect of their spiritual life. The tribe believed that fire was a messenger of spirits. It lit the darkness and showed the way. But one day, during one of the darkest seasons of the year, when the sun hardly rose, fire began to behave strangely. Its flame grew dim and small, and the sparks flew upwards without lighting the ground. The tribe became worried. Some believed it was a sign of evil spirits. Others thought that the earth itself was angry and had forgotten about them. This terror forced them to act. They decided that they must return the fire to its normal strength, or they would all perish in the coming darkness. The return of fire. The tribe made a decision. Everyone gathered around the great fire, where the flames were the strongest and most constant. Everyone understood that in this battle against the darkness, they had to act together. The elders told them they must use ancient methods to rekindle the fire. They began to collect dry grasses, small twigs, and burn them to create the flame. Soon, the fire began to fill the space with light and warmth again. It returned, and with it came the sense of salvation. The tribe realized that fire was not only their protection, but also an essential part of their lives, without which they could not survive. It was their weapon against the darkness. The influence of fire on the tribe. Over time, fire continued to change every aspect of the tribe's life. It provided warmth, but could also bring pain and death if not handled properly. It influenced everything, from food to culture, from hunting to relationships. Even their mythology was tied to fire. Fire rituals became an integral part of their spiritual life. Every tribe gathered around the fire, praying to the spirits of fire for success in hunting, fertility of the land, and protection from enemies. Fire became not just a survival tool, but a symbol of strength, light, and life. The mystery of the stone cave. The tribe gradually mastered new skills, learning to use fire for various purposes. However, one winter, in the middle of the season, they discovered something unusual. Along one of the mountain rivers, deep in the forest, they found a cave hidden from outsiders. Inside this cave, there was an incredible silence and a mysterious atmosphere. When they looked inside, they saw strange drawings on the walls. They were images of animals, hunters, and people. But the most amazing thing among them were images of fire. It was depicted as a giant figure, emanating light and illuminating the path through the dark parts of the cave. These drawings were not only art for the tribe, but also a hint from their ancestors, reminding them that fire had always been a part of their history. Fire as a symbol of life. With each passing day, fire became an increasingly important part of the tribe's life. It was used not only for warmth, cooking, and protection, but also as a symbol of life and strength. To them, fire was like a living being. It could be kind, but if not respected, it became dangerous and destructive. They began conducting rituals dedicated to fire in order to receive its blessing and protection. These rituals were performed on the darkest nights, when fire was their only source of light and warmth. And they believed that every time the flame burned brightly and steadily, the spirits of their ancestors were watching over them with approval. The fire struggle. Not all members of the tribe agreed with this relationship to fire. Some believed they were too dependent on the element and that they should learn to live without it. On one winter night, when the fire in their campfire went out, a group of young hunters decided to go in search of food without relying on fire. They believed they could survive without it. But soon, they faced the fact that the cold penetrated every corner of their bodies, and darkness surrounded them. They couldn't light a fire without tools, and their strength was fading. The realization came only when a few hunters nearly perished from the cold. Fire was not just an element, but a vital part of their existence. Traditions passed through generations. When the tribe regained its strength, they decided that fire must be preserved as part of their traditions, passed down from generation to generation. Every year, they taught their children the art of fire making, as well as respect and understanding of its power. Fire became a symbol of their determination, their struggle for survival, and above all, their connection to the ancestors who taught them to live in harmony with nature. In this way, the flame continued to burn, linking generations. The flame that never goes out. Over the years, fire became increasingly sacred to the tribe. They believed that fire was a gift from their ancestors, and its flame should never go out. To preserve this tradition, they began performing special rituals in which fire played a central role. It became a symbol of life, strength, and their connection with the spirit world. These rituals were conducted at the most significant moments in their lives, during births, weddings, and when someone from the tribe passed away. However, despite their efforts to keep the fire alive, one day, disaster struck. On one particularly cold winter day, the fire in their campfire went out. Panic spread through the tribe. Without fire, they felt helpless, cold, and vulnerable. In this moment, when everything seemed lost, one of the elders suggested turning to ancient traditions. He shared that even his ancestors used a special technique, fire making with stone and wood. In a place where they used to gather stones for tools, there was a rare stone that could ignite sparks. The elder suggested that they all try this technique together, and after several unsuccessful attempts, the fire was rekindled. At that moment, when the fire once again filled the space with its light and warmth, the tribe felt a deep connection with their ancestors and nature. Fire became their protector and source of strength once more. From that day on, the tribe vowed never to forget that fire was not just a tool for survival, but also a reminder of their eternal bond with those who had lived before them.